Hello everyone, welcome to another one of my Infinity Tactica videos, and this time we'll be discussing reactive turn and how do I approach reactive turn, what principles I try to adhere and what rules always go through my mind, and generally how to set up yourself for the reactive turn. Personally, reactive turn has always been the favorite part of Infinity the game for me, and it was a puzzle I always enjoyed figuring out, and from my experience I think I'm very comfortable going second, and even if the mission does not necessitate me to go second, sometimes I still prefer to counterplay my opponent rather than take the initiative and deploy second, counter-deploy my opponent, and then go second and play from there. And of course, Infinity is an environment where the Alpha Strike is very powerful, and a lot of the time it sets up games, and you can lose the games in reactive turn, so I'm sure a lot of you have some experience of at least being tabled or alpha striked off the table at least once. So while this might be true, there are some advantages of going second in Infinity that don't take mission into account. First of all, you get to deploy second and you get to counter deploy your opponent. Second of all, the initiative and the tempo of the game is on your opponent. So the opponent, because he's taking the first turn or she, they have to set up the game for themselves, and if they fail to do that, you should be in a very comfortable position to strike from second and win the game from this position. So if you play the successful reactive turn, a lot of the times you can turn the tables on your opponent and win very quickly, very handily if you go second. So without further ado, let's just start with the rules, shall we? Okay. So the rule number one is you always have to remember that you win in the active turn, not in the reactive turn. And it's completely fine and sufficient to not lose in the reactive turn. A successful or good reactive turn is if you don't lose. And importantly, I don't mean by losing, getting a 10-0 or completely wiped out of the table, but you only have to not suffer a critical mission condition where you just flat out lose, right? So you have to be able to keep playing the game after the first important turn. For example, let's just go into the TS and I'm going to show you what I mean by that, by not losing. Okay, let's pretend that we are a Kestrel player and we're playing against Vanilla Combined Army. The mission is completely irrelevant, we were Alpha Strike, and this is what is the situation at the start of our first turn. Our Tick Blank, which was our lieutenant, is immobilized and isolated, thus a lieutenant loss. There's like a Jackal unconscious, you have another Jackal surviving, your Magistrate with Chain of Command is unconscious, and your Head Carry, which was an important piece of yours, is now stuck in close combat with the Sheshkin. It doesn't matter what the mission is, but you're playing with a Fugazi, 2 Fennecs, and a 1 Jackal. Let's pretend that this isn't something crazy, but you're down to, let's say, 100 points and 0 guns, and you're staring down a Sheshkin and let's say an overdrawn with a plasma sniper rifle that's overwatching the table. Even this might be a B-Pong, this might be supremacy, this might be even like armory, you're still screwed. At best, you get one singular turn of scoring, and then you're basically gonna get coup de grace and put out of the game and out of your misery. So this is a condition that we want to avoid. We're fine with bleeding objective points, that's fine. We should avoid, but we can take some losses, it's unavoidable. But there are some critical pieces that we need to win the mission, and we can't lose them. We cannot afford to lose them and be put in a situation where we cannot no longer win. This might also be true if you're playing, let's say, a specialist heavy mission and we lost all of our specialists. We just cooked, we just lost the game. We will be winning in the active turn, but in the reactive turn, it's fine if we don't lose, we can start out active turn and then we can play from the active turn. So this is rule number one, and it's very important to keep in mind. This means that you don't have to overcommit to the reactive turn. You don't have to kill entire army of your opponent. You don't have to set up like 5 or 6 arrow pieces. You don't need to overinvest yourself and overextend yourself trying to win the game and believing the dream that your opponent will try to fight your reactive pieces, you will roll hot and they will just lose. This generally won't happen, and please keep this in mind, that you will win in your active turn. It's fine if you don't lose in the reactive turn. Rule number 2. Board control is not as important as you think it is. I see, like, a lot of times, I do see some, generally I would say like beginner players, but sometimes more intermediate players, that they believe that there is some context of board control, and I don't want to give up the board control. I don't want my opponent to be free to do as he wish. I don't want my opponent to set up mines. I don't want my opponent to set up suppressive fires. So in this particular example, let's pretend that we're playing Supremacy and we're going second. There are 4 consoles, but let's not care about them at all right now. And our opponent has totally board control. We completely null deployed. There is nothing contesting our opponent from doing whatever they wish. And at this point, they can either 1, play the mission, 2nd, they can attack us into our deployment zone and try to force us into a lose condition, or they can set themselves up in the midfield. So let's just think what they could be doing. Obviously, the correct answer a lot of the times is to try to attack our order pool and thus generate a lead, which the active turn player, the first player, is generally required to do with the way that missions are scored at the end of the game. They need to get the snowball rolling, and your job as the reactive player is to prevent the snowball from rolling. But let's say that they want to do the mission. And again, we're just gonna copy the Cheskin because it's hardly relevant what miniatures they are. You can pretend that they are whatever models. But we're playing Supremacy. So let's say that they move up, they put the points into the zones, they might even advance into your deployment zone, into your half of the table. Let's say that this Cheskin is now successfully deployed in a suppressive fire, because our opponent believes that this is how they're going to win. They are playing the mission. They push this console. Let's pretend that there's a console. They push this console as well. They got this console, so they are now ahead by 3 consoles. They scored a classified objective, and they developed points into the quadrants with the Cheskin in suppressive fire. But this is completely irrelevant, because if we start our second turn with our full potential, our opponent is now outside of their own deployment zone. This is 1, so it's easier for us to reach them. Second of all, we don't have the orders taken from us by a command token, so we actually should have more activations than our opponent in the first turn. And third of all, we are the second player, and our opponent now failed to create a snowball effect, so we gain the initiative and we can create a snowball effect, but we counter-deployed our opponent and we play with the full and perfect knowledge of the game. So what generally will happen is you will start your turn, you will engage in whatever manner you want this Cheskin, you will kill her, then you will advance and put just enough points into the zones to either tie this or, well, generally tie this, because let's pretend that our opponent did successfully develop their board. And what then? It's now the opponent's second turn. They are behind on resources. You got the snowball rolling because you made them take the casualties. It doesn't matter if they are ahead on consoles, if they got a classified card. You still have the 2 more turns to play with, and the snowball is now rolling in their direction as opposed to your direction. Okay, so it's up to them to now claw back into the game. Let's do the option 2. Which is that they set themselves, well, it kind of combine both of them, but generally if they got the objectives, you still have enough turns to win the game back. Let's pretend that this is unmasking, and they got a kill on your HVT. Fine, they got a kill on your another HVT, and they finally got your third and last civilian. This is as terrible as it gets. They got all of the consoles, they killed all of your HVTs, they are now technically on a 9-0 lead. But it's still fine because you have 3 turns to do exactly the same to them. But because unmasking gives extra points to the person that last clicked the consoles, you can turn the tables and actually win the game. But again, you have a material advantage and you play with perfect information. Let's pretend that this is a supplies. Then it's also like worst case scenario. They are ahead of the mission, right? They should be in a good enough position, but not quite, because you still get time to recover those boxes. And a lot of the missions are actually not that really. There's not a lot to do in the missions that are scored at the end of the game. But if they develop their board, then they spend the resources to get closer to you, and not only they are closer to you, so it's less resources for you, but second of all, you play with the perfect information because you counter deploy them, and you should have more orders because of the counter intelligence. It's completely fine to give up the board control. Don't overestimate the idea of the board control. It's completely fine to give it up. If you don't really know how to play reactive turn and you're like super beginner and you don't really know what to do, it's better to just null deploy and give up the table than overcommit into the reactive turn and thus lose the game in this process. So let's go into the rule number 3, which is preserving your orders is more important than stalling your opponent. And what I mean by that is, let's again go back into the example of the loathsome combined army. And let's say that there is an overdrawn, right? Let's look, it should be, I guess, I don't know, hyper-rapid Tactica. It doesn't really matter. There's a overdrawn, there's a Sheskin. Those two will be attacking our deployment zone. So I often see with the beginner players that they will put a flash pulse bot in the reactive turn because this is supposed to be a disposable arrow piece. And like the overdrawn and the Sheskin are about to advance on it. So let's just say that the overdrawn is deployed here, the Sheskin is deployed somewhere there. Let's say that the overdrawn is like, oh, there. Our flash pulse bot will be here. Then let's say that another flash pulse bot will be deployed aggressively. Then we have 3 flash pulse bots because we are in a very good faction, and we'll deploy ourselves here. So here's what's going to most likely happen. Our opponent decides to develop the Sheskin. The Sheskin starts moving. She moves 6, then she moves 4 more, she moves again. So that was 2 orders already, and it's 3 orders. She instantly deletes this flash pulse bot. 3 orders for 1 order. You think to yourself that, well, this is a good trade, right, Muscle? This is a good trade because our opponent spent 3 orders to kill our flash pulse bot, and we only lost 1. But the truth is, you did not lose 1 order. You lost 3 orders because your Fugazi would actually give you 1 order in the first turn, 2nd order in your 2nd turn, 3rd order in your 3rd and final turn. So currently, this is an even exchange. But as a reactive player, again, we just don't want to lose. So it's still arguably fine. But what if our opponent spends less orders? Let's say the overdrawn spends 2 activations and destroys our flash pulse bot. Now we're behind because our opponent spent 2 orders to kill our flash pulse bot, and our flash pulse bot, let's just remove the grid so it's more clean, and our flash pulse bot was actually worth 3 orders, so we're behind on the our flash pulse bot was worth 3 orders, so we're now behind on the resources. And again, this overdrawn, move again, and engage another of our flash pulse bots. So currently the overdrawn spent 4 orders, Fugazi, 2 Fugazis are worth 6 orders, so we're now 2 orders behind. And those is like still not the worst possible situation you could have, because the overdrawn could just be deployed here and kill your Fugazi in the first order. And this is absolutely horrible. This is also very important with your more expensive reactive pieces. If they die in the 1 or 2 orders, then you're behind orders and you're behind points. So it's better for your flash pulse bot to be deployed prone. Then, of course, again, going back to the null deploy, but we'll get to how to actually defend ourselves and not lose. But if you hide all of your reactive pieces, and your opponent has to dig out this flash pulse, but this Cheskin now has to spend 2 more orders. So instead of 3, she spends 5, you lose 3 orders. So now you're ahead. Now you're up in orders. And this is a situation you want to create as a reactive player. Okay? It's better to not die than to stall your opponent out. Of course, there are differences, and the resources, the later part of the game, if it's turn 2 and your Cheskin spends 3 orders to kill your Fugazi in turn 2, then again you're ahead because Fugazi will generate only 2 orders. And in your final turn, final turn of the active player, 3 or 1, that's a good trade. But in the first turn, try not to overextend your pieces and give them up freely. Okay? So, another important that really comes with this, the more table you see, the more of the table gets to shoot you. And it's important if we take, for example, the infamous and loved by some, hated by some, the Blacker forward, FTO. That we'll be doing a reactive turn. This Blacker could be deployed in this position, so it could see this way. It could also see this way. So it covers a lot of the board, which you might think that is good, but it's actually quite the opposite. The reason for that is that because we know that our opponent has to deploy first, and we get to counter deploy them, the overdrawn that is a natural predator against the Blacker will be deployed here. So if our Blacker contests all of the fire lanes, then the overdrawn will be able to be deployed here, kill him from this position, kill him from this position, kill him from this position. So from this position or this position, so there's a lot of places that the overdrawn can kill our sniper. And always know that in the active turn, the active player has all of the agency in the world, and they will always choose the best possible way to engage your RRPs, which means that the more opportunities for them, the more opportunities you give to your opponent to actually fight with you, the more likely for them is that they find the specific answer for you to kill you. So let's say that the overdrawn is deployed on this side of the table for whatever reason our opponent wants to deploy it here. Instead of deploying the Blacker here, where the overdrawn can find an angle in 2 orders on this position, we should be deploying the Blacker in this position. This position only covers this and this side of the table. This side of the table, which is actually beneficial to us because our opponent overdrawn, again, from this side of the table, has to spend 1, 2, 3, around 4 orders to get to engage our Blacker. Not only it's 4 orders, but it then has to retreat more orders, and it will be closer for us to retaliate against this overdrawn. So instead of giving our opponent an easy second order shot, third order going back into cover, we force our opponent to go 4 orders forward and around 2 orders back. So we waste more resources out of our opponent if they want to take the favorable fight. We can then stack it with some other tools, but sometimes our opponent will see that this is just too much effort and they will just completely not interact with your reactive piece. And that's actually a good thing, because remember that the Blacker, while being a reactive piece, will generate us 3 orders over the course of the game. And we don't have to worry about this side of the table if our opponent does not want to contest this. So the game will be played on this side of the table, and we can then redirect more resources into this side of the table and fight our opponent again. So, rule number 5. Predict your opponent alpha strike, then counter it. This is very important. Let me just load the game that I prepared to showcase you the example of how we can counter deploy our opponent and how to predict them. This time we'll be using Torchlight as our villain of this story. The reason for Torchlight is that this was the army that I most recently played against, so it was easier for me to just grab some models. But of course, this applies to absolutely every single army, because I divided the models into the attacker will be either the long range pieces, which will be the loathsome guided missile launcher, prime, and the wrecker in this example. Close range pieces, those that want to engage up close and personal. They are either by close combat or good shooting stats in close range, or templates, or all of them. And the mission doers, like basically button pushers, right? They might have decharges, they might secure classifieds, whatever, they are important for the mission. And for you, your army divides kinda outside of the cheerleaders and like baggage bots that don't do anything. They are either the arrow pieces or they are the high value pieces. High value pieces you always want to protect, and those would include a Tigbalank, which is your tag, head carry, a magistrate because it will be either lieutenant or chain of command, a doctor and an engineer, a doctor that's like glued to the link. And arrow pieces are models that you prefer not to lose, but they are not your active turn pieces. If you don't have them in your active turn, you can win with your high value pieces. So going back to point 1, you win in the active turn, so you want to preserve your active pieces while you're fine with sacrificing the reactive pieces. But not sacrificing for free, but trading them out, either for resources or for kills. So we go into the supposedly the torchlight deployment, and we can see that the wrecker, which is the long range fighter, is deployed here. The other long range fighter, which is the prime, is deployed here, and the guided missile launcher is deployed in this corner. Then the close quarter hitters will be the Jamie, the Hellblazer, the Hippolyta, and there's the Beast Hunter here. Of course, this is not a full list, but it's just an example. But from this, let's try to guess how the alpha strike of our opponent will go. So obviously the alpha strike, which will be in our deployment, will be done by the close hitters. The Hippolyta can either go this direction, or this direction. Actually can go either of those 3 alleyways. Let's just always assume that they will take the shortest route. So the shortest route to deployment is here. The Beast Hunter will either go this way or this way. But there is an HVT that is in a masking plate, so we'll deploy it. We'll assume that the Beast Hunter will go this way. And the Hippolyta, we assume, will be the closest way, goes here. I always try to put myself in my opponent's shoes and try to figure out what's the game plan. And let's just say that the Jamie and the fire team most likely will go through the middle, because they are set up in the middle. So this will probably be the close attack pieces that will engage in our deployment zone. So let's think about the hard hitting long range firepower. The prime is a very good model to fight our blacker, which will be our hard arrow. It's good to fight against our mimeric targets. And the wrecker can be outranged, but they can either like shoot here or here. So most likely what will happen is our opponent game plan is quite simple. The prime and the wrecker will open the way, and the close range melee fighters will engage us. So at this point, we counter deploy and we start with our, let's say, a hard arrow. The black air, again, could be deployed on this tower because it's sniper tower, but then this means that the prime, which is located behind this building, can engage in a good gunfight straight from the get-go, possibly kill our model in one order, which is not something we like. So after some consideration, we see that the line we can deploy to counter deploy the wrecker and actually outrange it, which by the way is just like outside of 32 from the farthest point the wrecker is. So we can take a good gunfight against the wrecker. And at the same time, the prime, if it engages from this position, it will also be outside of good range. This means that our opponent will now be forced to maneuver the prime in this way and engage ours inside the good range in this position. So now we know that the prime will be here to engage our blacker. So we now counter deploy not where the prime is, but where the prime will be. And we counter it with if we have a hacker, because prime is hackable, and we know that the scarecrow in this position, well, of course, I forgot about the exclusion zone, so pardon. But you know, the real is that the prime will be here. So the scarecrow, which is here, will be able to hack the prime once it engages into blacker. But also we stack one more extra model, which is the blink, which then it can shoot the prime as it engages. So if the prime maneuvers into a position we predict it will be, it will have to contest the blacker, the scarecrow, and the blink. And this is a situation where our opponent can lose the prime. It can be a fatal blow to him. That again with the tag, most likely the tag to not engage against the blacker will try to move not in this direction, but in this direction, to not see the blacker, and most likely move somewhere to the middle, which again we expect the wrecker to be here, so the blink is there to contest it. The Hippolyta then. So we assume that the blacker will go down, because you have to make this assumption. So the Hippolyta will most likely go this way and maneuver herself through this opening. So we now need to contest and protect ourselves from this position. Oops, sorry. And this was not meant to happen. So the Jackal is deployed to cover the Hippolyta from advancing. Same with this Yamabushi to cover the advance of the Hippolyta, because we presume she will be here. As well, the blink presumably will shoot the Hippolyta if she advances in this position. Then finally, because this is unmasking, there is one extra rule, which is, oh well, don't take fights you can't win. So let's assume that there is no position where we can outrange our opponent, and the only decent spot for the blacker is here, or like, let's say we have to put the blacker here. There's no other position for him, but the prime will just absolutely demolish the blacker. There is no doubt about it that the prime will kill the blacker. It's a matter of whether it will be one or two orders. I personally would rather either A, deploy the blacker where it contests practically nothing, which meaning that it like gets sliver a line here, maybe cover this area of the table, maybe deploy where the Jackal is, or even put it on this tower and put it prone. Because I understand that the blacker will just die if I take the fight against the prime. I just don't take it at all. I'd rather have the blacker generate orders than to take a face-to-face which it can't possibly win. It's fine if it's a coin flip, it's fine if your opponent is slightly favored, it's always going to be the case. But if like there's no chance for you to kill, let's say, a Salamander, right? You're not going to kill the Salamander. You would have to waste 3 orders of the Salamander to be equal, because again, you donate 3 orders over the course of the game. So just don't take this fight. And it's especially true against the Overdrawn. If I play against Combined Army, I just put my blacker either in a corner or prone on the rooftop. So I don't take this fight. Because you might get a better opportunity later down the line. What I mean by that is, let's just say that the prime in the first turn of yours just dies. It just gets absolutely destroyed. There is no longer a prime on the table. If you then stand up the blacker in this position, there is no more prime to contend it, and now your opponent is in really big trouble. But if you just don't put it prone in the first turn and just instantly dies, your opponent no longer has to worry about prime getting up. But if the prime is prone, your opponent has to consider that if the prime goes down, the blacker will be able to then dominate the table, which might force your opponent to engage in like shooting a pitcher or engaging in close combat, whatever. Finally, now the final, and I think the final rule is if possible, try to trade objectives for kills. And this is unmasking. Again, remember, there is a Beast Hunter. The Beast Hunter is a very disposable piece that is very good at killing your HVTs. So most likely it will go into close combat and kill your HVT. So I set up Yamabushi in camo to get a good chain rifle against the Beast Hunter and trade my HVT for the Beast Hunter. Same with this position. This HVT, Hippolyta is most likely going to kill the HVT in close combat because she's a close combat monster. So the Jackal is set up so the Jackal can Panzerfaust Hippolyta if she goes for the objective. It's fine to let your opponent take the boxes, take the HVTs, take the consoles, but if possible, try to force a trade or force a kill. Because don't allow your opponent to use a disposable piece to score an objective and you don't punish him. So try to avoid situations where your opponent kills your HVT with a Liberto for freebies, because you can get the kill, you can trade the Liberto, you can trade the HVT for the Liberto. Try to do that. Any kill you get in your reactive turn is worth a lot. Even if it's a Liberto, if it's a Beast Hunter, it's a model you don't have to worry about later down the line. And we come back to the idea of the snowball. You have to stop the snowball. So if you lose 3 models, you need to kill more than the 3 models, because you're losing out 3 times 3, which is 9. So you should kill 9 orders of value from your opponent to get even. Try to prevent the snowball. I really hope you stick with me to the end and you gain some valuable knowledge of the reactive turn and how I approach it. So thanks everyone for watching. As always, I really welcome critique and comment, and I'd be very happy to do some case studies if you'd be interested in, but I would need those cases. Thanks everyone for watching, and I hope you have an enjoyable rest of your day, and see you next time. Bye!